Can you tell which side was painted with opaque watercolor and which side was painted with gouache? Go ahead and leave your guess in the comments. A few years ago, if you wanted pastel watercolor, you simply mixed white gouache with watercolor. But recently, more and more companies have started selling something called opaque watercolor. Holbein has it, White Knight has it, a Gallo just released an entire collection, and brands like Fuumui are building a whole pastel palette around it. So, what exactly are we buying? Is opaque watercolor a new medium? Is it just a gouache with better marketing, or does it actually behave differently? Today, we're going to find out. I don't think it's a coincidence that opaque watercolor is becoming popular now. Pastel colors are everywhere in journaling, in illustration, in stationery, in children's book, and especially on social media. Traditional watercolor shines because of its transparency, but transparency makes pastel colors difficult. To get a pale pink, you usually diluted the paint with lots of water. The problem is that lots of water also means less saturation. Opaque watercolor solves this by replacing some of the water with white pigment. In theory, you get soft pastel colors that still remain vibrant. Let's start with Fuumuui Pastel watercolor. There is a funny story behind me ordering this set, but I will share it when I receive the second half of my order. Look at these full pastel colors. They are magical, cotton candy, dreamy, unicorn inspired shades. I mean, how can you not love these colors? They remind me of macaroons, confetti, kids' toys, cakes, and desserts. This set has 24 colors divided into 5 main color families with several tinted shades. We have yellows, peaches, pinks, purples, blues, and greens. The swatch sheet includes the color names and pigment information. These are unapologetically candy colored. Next, we have the A Gallo mid-century set, this one of their newest collection. When I received their newsletter featuring this set, I was surprised and curious to try a high-quality watercolor mixed with white pigment. These colors are inspired by the work of Charles and George Nelson and other designers. On their website, they explain how to use these colors alongside their transparent watercolors. And I quote, begin with luminous underpaintings, then refine with opaque accents, highlights, text, and define edges. Close quote. These paints contain multiple pigments mixed with white. For example, avocado green contains PY184, PG17, PB11, and PW6. The colors are beautiful. They feel like a more muted version of the Fuumuui Pastel set. This set is also more versatile because it includes a wider range of colors rather than several shades of the same color family. Next is an oldie but goldie, the Gansai Tambi 24 color set. This set reminds me a lot of the Gallo set, but it's much more affordable. The colors are beautiful, although the only information provided is the color name and number. There's no pigment information. information. Japanese artists have been using semi-opaque watercolor like paints for decades. Gansai paints were never marketed as opaque watercolor, but many artists noticed they behave like gouache kind of feeling. Next is Holbein. Holbein actually sells both products, opaque watercolors slash regular watercolor, and gouache, which gives us a perfect opportunity for side-by-side comparison. They offer 12 opaque watercolors, and I picked 9 of them to swatch. Most are pastel shades of pink, blue, green, purple, and yellow. I also selected the same colors in their gouache formula to see how similar they are. The answer is very similar. When diluted with water, it's really hard to tell the difference. However, when used more thickly, the gouache has a different texture. In fact, if you dilute gouache enough, it behaves very much like opaque watercolors. And for the first test, we are looking at opacity. I die cut some tags using the 3-tiered 6 tag die. It's discontinued, but you may be able to find it a second hand on eBay or look for a similar alternatives from other brands. Anyway, I drew a black line with a Posca marker and swatched a pink shade over it. You can see the paints vary in opacity. The black line is not clearly visible through most of them. For comparison, here is a transparent pink watercolor from a Roman Schmal, and you can clearly see the black line underneath. The second test is layering or glazing. Can we build up layers of color like we do with traditional watercolor? Again, I will compare the opaque watercolors alongside transparent watercolor. I used a Daniel Smith green palette color and tried to match the shades. I decided to layer a lavender purple color. As you can see, layering creates a very different effect. The second layer doesn't behave like transparent watercolor. Instead of deepening the color, it sits on the top and changes the appearance of the first layer. The true color is visible in the top box, while the color layered over the green background appears quite different. So glazing with opaque watercolor is not really its strength. However, using a thicker consistency can give you a gouache-like effect where one layer covers another rather than glazing through it. Now let's look at the transparent watercolor layering. By the second layer, the color becomes more vibrant, rich, and intense. So transparent watercolor deepens, opaque watercolor replaces. Another fun experiment was applying transparent watercolor over opaque watercolor. Immediately you can see the watercolor becomes lighter. The possibilities of combining these two mediums are endless. But I think they really need to be explored in a finished painting rather than just through swatching. The next test is color spreading. A traditional watercolor quickly flows into wet areas and blends beautifully. Opaque watercolor behave differently. Opaque watercolor behaves more like a polite guest. It tends to stay where you place it and does not move on its own unless you actively guide it. The mixing behavior is quite interesting. Instead of quickly becoming muddy, many color combination create a soft gray tone. Interesting, right? Another test is rewetting. I selected one color from each brand, and as you can see, most of them rewet rather poorly. This is not surprising. Titanium white tends to create a denser paint film. Some manufacturers also add extra binders to improve stability. I also wondered if adding white pigment suppresses granulation. Unfortunately, the white pigment seems to smooth everything out. If you want to try these pastel milky colors without investing in a new set, simply buy a tube of Chinese white or titanium white and mix it with your transparent watercolors. Here I selected a few Holbein colors. First I swatched the color on their own, then I mixed them with white. And wow, look at those beautiful pastel shades. After all these tests, I don't think opaque watercolor is completely new medium. It behaves somewhere between watercolor and gouache, but if I had to describe it in one sentence, I would say opaque watercolor is essentially watercolor that has already been pre-mixed with white pigment. The advantage is convenience. The manufacturer have already chosen color combination that would take me quite a while to consistently myself. The downside is that you lose many of the qualities people usually love about watercolor: luminous glazing, effortless layering, and beautiful wet and wet movement. So, will I stop using them? Definitely not. I actually think they shine in sketchbooks, journals, mixed media projects, and whimsical illustration. When I want traditional watercolor magic, I will still reach for transparent paints.